perhaps the most burning question surrounding the Vikings right now. Is Christian Darrisaw the left tackle now, or do we still have to do more of this rotating weird stuff going into the bye week? We're going to answer that, talk about the day's news, and also have crossover Thursday with Locked On Panthers here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you all so much for making the Locked On Vikings podcast your first listen each and every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at LukeBraunNFL, and you can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Today on the show, I want to start with the Christian Darrisaw question. I want to talk a little bit about his performance on Sunday in some limited action in a little bit more detail and kind of go over, is he going to start? We also have a little bit of injury report news and stuff like that. And then, of course, we're going to start talking about the Panthers as well with Julian Council. He will get me headed in the right direction. They're a very weird team, so we'll talk a little bit about them too. But first, okay. Is Christian Darrisaw good? I mean, that's the operative question here, right? What we saw in that game, I think we saw a smattering of a lot of different abilities or lack thereof that Christian Darrisaw has. We saw a lot of the same stuff that he had in college. I saw a little bit of a mean streak, which was really nice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So let's start there. So in that Lions game, and this isn't really Lions game analysis, this is more about, is he going to start against the Panthers? And the Panthers have Brian Burns and Hassan Reddick, and they've got, edge rushing threats that have been very, very, very effective. So who starts at tackle is an extremely important question for this game. You'll see in the conversation later with Julian, they have a very similar vibe to the Vikings this year, where they kind of have that same feeling where they're teetering on the edge of the abyss in like every game. They're kind of on this big skid right now. And B, they've got a good pass rush, but also an offensive line that is struggling. So there's going to be a lot of sacks in this one. They've got, a oft injured, but superstar running back. And I think both teams' fan bases at least have a similar feel about their quarterback, where they go, man, I think we spent too much on this guy. He's fine. And he's got, his ups and downs and all that, but is he good enough to take us all the way and all that? I hear like a lot of the same stuff coming out of Julian and the Panthers and all that. So really interesting stuff about the Panthers. But all of this is to say, who's on left tackle is really, really, really important. And the reason for that is we also have an Oli Udoh problem. And if you have to protect the left tackle, it makes it a lot harder to fix your Oli Udoh problem. If you remember the protection stuff we went over a couple of weeks ago, and if you don't, suffice it to say, every play Garrett Bradbury makes a decision about which side to kind of lean the protection toward. And have, will you give more help to the left side or to the right side, right? Or to, the outside or the inside, that kind of thing. And if you are helping the outside every play because it's Rashad Hill and he's getting the crap kicked out of him every play, you have to, in order to give Rashad Hill that help, a lot of times you have to leave Oli Udoh on an island unless the offense's or the defense's alignment allows you to put Oli Udoh as part of the wall as well. So Oli Udoh is getting help from this bunch of offensive linemen, and then you're leaving Brian O'Neill on an island, on a really dangerous island, but he's good. He can handle that, right? And he's been fantastic. So if you're struggling with Oli Udoh and stunts and twists and all that stuff, and you want to help him with that, you can't. It's really hard, at least, to help him with that and also help Rashad Hill at the same time. They're too far apart on the line from one another. And so that's a big problem, right? So here's where I'm at with Darrisaw right now. I was always really cautious about kind of demanding, with pounding the table and saying, put Christian Darrisaw in right now, Rashad Hill, because If he wasn't healthy, he wasn't healthy. And it seems like we're past that, but that was obviously a big reason, for the first few weeks. And then if he hasn't taken a practice in the NFL yet, you don't want to just throw that guy in as the starter, because those protection calls are very complicated. And if you do the wrong thing, it can screw up the whole play. And same thing in run blocking and all that stuff. You got to know where you're supposed to go. And a rookie that's only had 12 practices and missed all of the offseason and most of camp and all that, like that is obviously going to be a really, really, really tough challenge for him. So you don't want to rush him through that. So I was always sympathetic to that. But now he's been in, right? He's been in the game. He was ready enough to start some of the snaps, but not ready enough to start all of the snaps, which I still feel really weird about. But whatever, we did it, right? So in those snaps, what I did not notice were mental errors. I did not notice blown assignments. I noticed those with Oli Udoh, who isn't being benched, but who's to say that Wyatt Davis is any better at that? Because he's also a rookie, right? But I didn't necessarily notice that. And honestly, I thought Christian Darrisaw had a reasonable day. So he wasn't perfect on the day, and he had a few issues, but he showed the same anchor that we had from him in college. He has clearly, that same kind of strange lumbering athleticism. It's so weird to watch Christian Darrisaw because he looks so much slower than he is. It looks like he's practically walking on the field. And then he gets to the spot with like plenty of time to spare. Like it's really, he's like a frame rate glitch, animation glitch. But I mean, that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of weird to parse when you're watching him. So what I guess he struggled and would struggle the most with in run blocking are the quicker blocks to set up, like hinge blocks and just like straight up down blocks and stuff. When he was actually asked to get into the second level, I thought he did a reasonable job at that. But hinge blocks are almost like pass blocks. You kind of set up and all you're trying to do is seal somebody from the outside of the play, usually an edge rusher, Trey Flowers, or it'll be Brian Burns, seal Brian Burns. The run's going to be up the middle, keep Brian Burns from becoming a part of that play, right? So it's almost like a pass block, but unlike a pass block where it's like a pass block for a pass with no drop back depth. And that's a weird thing about like the decision you have to make as an offensive lineman is what depth is the quarterback dropping to? If he's dropping really deep, that means that I can it's like harder for me. Like I have to commit more to blocking up field. And if he's dropping like shallow, if it's a quick set or like a 3-step drop or something, I don't mind getting beat up field because the quarterback's not upfield. And this is the same thing with the run play. The run play is going straight up the middle. I don't have to, if the defensive end beats me upfield, that's fine. That's going the opposite direction of the play. So I can do that. So that, like, reading what the lineman is doing and reading your assignment and all that stuff. There was one really bad one where he just overdid it, where he said, okay, you can beat me upfield, but then you just set way too far downfield. And the guy just like went straight in and took the cutback lane away. And a lot of them were just, I think it's just a matter of kind of spacing. You're a gigantic 320 pound or whatever he is guy, and you have to precisely place yourself. It's just really hard to do. And that's a feel for the game thing that you can take all the mental reps you want. That's something that you can kind of only drill on the field. That's a 12 practices kind of thing. And I guess it'll be 15 practices by the time this game against the Panthers starts. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him rotate. I kind of feel like he's ready though. Like it's not a mental mistake thing. It's not a catastrophe. He needs a little bit more of a feel for the game, but I feel like the cost of that is maybe a blown run block that takes away a cutback lane, doesn't even blow up the whole play by itself, but just takes away a cutback lane, or maybe a pressure or two or something like that. And I feel like the cost of Rashad Hill is just a lot higher than that. And so if it were me, I would put Christian Darrisaw out there. Obviously, I haven't seen any of the practices. If he's just totally sucking out there in practice, that would change my mind a little bit. And I don't know what he's done beforehand or what Rashad Hill's doing in practice, all that stuff. So I get that like the Vikings might make a different decision because they have like a lot more information. But if it were me, I would say it's time. Get the kid out there. It's over. Well, we'll see what happens in that game. There's a lot of other stuff we have to talk about for that game, but I also want to talk to you about your windshield. It is rainy season, everyone, and it's also about to be sleet and snow season if you're actually in Minnesota or anywhere up north, and that means you got to make sure your windshield wipers are right. So if you are seeing streaks on your windshield right now, that could get really dangerous later when all that stuff starts to freeze. That's like really rough. So don't have streaky but like getting your windshield wipers replaced is so expensive, but not if you go to rockauto.com. And you can do this for a lot of problems with your car. If you need to take your car in, you can tell the mechanic, hey, what if I bring you the part and then you just install it and you can save some money that way. Go to rockauto.com, have the mechanic tell you what part you need, and enter your make, your year, and your model. It'll sort through, make sure you're getting something that's compatible with your vehicle and its special needs. Get whatever you want, including windshield wiper blades. Just go measure how big your windshield wipers are and go buy blades for like $3. Like, it's super cheap and you can just slide them on and off. Watch a YouTube tutorial if you have to. Easy peasy. Whatever you get at Rock Auto, there is a how you heard about us section at checkout. Let them know there that Locked On sent you, because if you don't, the bunnies are threatening to accelerate climate change. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Headed into Sunday's game against the Carolina Panthers, the Vikings have made a little move. They signed Luke Stalker to their practice squad. It's just a practice squad tight end. I usually wouldn't cover it, but Luke Stalker's a very interesting. He's been in the league for a long time Tampa Bay Buccaneer, and he was a Falcon for the last couple of years. Also spent a couple of years with the Titans. He has basically been like a he's been like a 2-3 catch a year kind of guy for most of his career, but he's been in the league and he's been around the block. It's, I think, an interesting guy to bring in. Notably, we'll go over the rest of the injury report in a bit, but notably, Ben Ellefson was one of the non-participants in practice, and then they go get a tight end on their practice squad, go get a veteran tight end that like can perhaps fill in for a couple of games. It kind of smells like that, or maybe it's just a guy for depth. To make room, also interestingly, to make room on their practice squad, they released from their practice squad Kyle Hinton, a draft pick from a couple years ago. He was a 7th round pick. He was always kind of a long shot, a Washburn hyper athlete. Small school hyper athlete, one of those kind of classic Rick Spielman guys. He never looked good. He looked worse than Wyatt Davis's debut, which was pretty bad. He looked worse than Dakota Dozier, Drew Samia ever did in preseason and stuff. He just never put it together. He was always a hyper athlete that needed to learn so much to become something. I mean, if he did learn the position and if, he improved his technique and improved all these things, you'd have this like crazy good tackle. So it was always this kind of high risk or this like high reward kind of shoot for the moon kind of play. But 7th round pick off the practice squad. And that's usually kind of the death knell for a guy's time in a particular team. Maybe he goes and gets picked up somewhere else. But that's Luke Stalker. As for the injury report, by the way, if you're watching on YouTube, and thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day on YouTube or otherwise, but if you're watching on YouTube, injury report for the Vikings will be on screen right now. If not, listen carefully. There were a lot of DNPs, and it's pretty scary. You had Everson Griffin and Harrison Smith were DNPs. Harrison Smith was actually limited, but both of those guys are just veteran rest days, so nothing to worry about there. But here's the injury report of other people who didn't participate. We had Ben Ellefson, he's got a knee. Anthony Barr with his knee, again, didn't participate after looking kind of slow in that Detroit game. He's like clearly not 100%. So we have to monitor that again. Alexander Madison with a shoulder. Dalvin Cook was limited with an ankle, so at least we've got that. Michael Pierce still not practicing with an elbow injury, and here's the kicker. Both Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen did not participate. Jefferson's dealing with an ankle, Thielen's dealing with a foot injury, so that is a huge situation to monitor as the week rolls on, and hopefully both of those guys finished out the game, played the game in Detroit, so who knows what that was. It could just be something that they didn't feel in the game, and then they wake up and something's really sore and they're being really cautious. It could be something more serious than that. So we just have to watch and see how the week plays out. So I'll update you tomorrow on the practice report from Thursday as well, from today. In terms of limited participant, also CJ Ham was limited with a quad, and Amir Smith-Marset, some good news. He was DNP for a while. He's dealing with a toe injury. He has been upgraded to limited, so we might get our kick returner back. And Nick Vigil dealing with an ankle injury, full participation. He's been dealing with that ankle injury for a while. Much shorter list for the Carolina Panthers. Shaq Thompson, linebacker, was their only DNP. He's got a foot injury. Their punter, Joseph Carlton, has a back injury. He was limited. CJ Henderson, the corner they just traded for, has a shoulder injury. And of course, Christian McCaffrey limited with a hamstring injury. He is probably going to be a game time decision. That's the way Julian described it to me in the interview you'll hear in a second. And then Cam Irving also has a neck injury, but he's a full participant, so he'll probably play. Also, they did trade for Stephen Gilmore. He's still on the physically unable to perform list, so he won't be playing in this game, in case you had thought that. I know some people were like, oh no, we have to contend with Stephen Gilmore. No, we don't. He's not going to be there until after this game is over. Also, Kene Wangwu did some work on, he's not off of IR yet, so he's not on like the official injury report, but Wangwu did do some work in practice. So obviously that's still coming along. He can come off of IR kind of whenever. So that's the injury report. Obviously we've got some scary stuff going on with the skill players. You know, we've got maybe Dalvin Cook. I mean, him being limited is a pretty good sign. No Alexander Madison, no Jefferson, no Thielen. We lost like all the skill players are gone. You're going to be trotting out there in a world like worst case scenario is you've got Kirk Cousins throwing to like KJ Osborne and DD Westbrook like exclusively, and you're upgrading, Dan Chisena from like I guess Dan Chisena would be the wide receiver 3 in that scenario because he's back on the proper 53 after some weird roster shenanigans you don't need to worry about. And you'd be handing off to Amir Abdullah, and your like primary tight end would be like Tyler Conklin, and then like Chris Herndon, and you'd upgrade Luke Stalker, who's in his like 11th year. I don't know about this one. Like that's pretty rough. That's a worst case scenario. And you probably have Jake Bargas backup fullback as well, since CJ Ham's also on the injury report. Again, worst case scenario, but there's a lot of stuff to monitor. And I want to get into the actual Panthers, though, because Julian, Council, and I had an awesome conversation that we get to talk about. For the meantime, this game, as I am recording this, the Vikings are 1-point road favorites. So if you want to bet on that or bet against it, a little emotional hedge has never hurt anybody. You can go to betonline.ag. I've been having a lot of fun with their prop builder and their live betting apparatus. Just betting the spread can get a little dull after a while. But I think it's really fun to go see, yardage over-unders for Dalvin Cook or Justin Jefferson, or, how many interceptions will Kirk Cousins throw, all that kind of stuff. It's really, really, really fun. So head on over to betonline.ag. You can also bet on the WNBA finals, currently tied 1-1, and that last game between the Sky and the Mercury was a heater. So you can bet on whatever you want, even your favorite Vegas casino games, baseball playoffs, of course. You can find whatever you like on there. And if you sign up right now, you can use promo code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, when you make your first deposit to get a 50% welcome bonus. That means if your first deposit is, say, $100, you get $50 more stacked on top of it in free play money, courtesy of betonline.ag, where the game starts. All right, everybody, continuing on here. It is crossover Thursday, Vikings Panthers. That means that I, Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, am here with Julian Council of Locked On Panthers. What's up, Julian? Been looking forward to getting a crossover with you.
Yeah, Luke. I saw you tweeted at me earlier this week being like, got crossover with Julian. First guy who's done that on the network so far this season. So actually been kind of fired up all week to do this with you. So yeah, man, let's get into it. Panthers, Vikings, pretty big game for both of these teams coming up here on Sunday in Charlotte.
Yeah, definitely a big game because it feels like both of these teams are like teetering on the edge of the abyss. Like the Vikings have been staving off the abyss all season, and the Panthers get out to this hot start, and now they're kind of like trying to stop this skid. So I guess that's my main question. I haven't looked much into the Panthers, so point me in the right direction. What's going on? What is the difference between, was it just strength of schedule? Is something else going on? What's causing this skid?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know after the 3-0 start, a lot of people were like, okay, we get it. Carolina's defense is fantastic. Sam Darnold looks like he's been rehabilitated through 3 weeks in Joe Brady's offense and coming here to Carolina, a market that's not as tough, obviously, as being in the New York market, and a better situation that he had for the first 3 years of his career in New York with the Jets. So all that was very true. And also the schedule, you got 2 rookie quarterbacks in Davis Mills, the Houston Texans, when you should have got Tyrod Taylor, but got hurt on that Sunday game against Cleveland, had to exit at halftime, didn't play the second half. Before then, the Texans were a fairly competitive team through a week and a half. You also got a rookie quarterback in his debut in Zach Wilson, which was dubbed the Sam Darnold revenge game. You can also throw in Robbie Anderson
revenge game, yeah.
Yeah, and Panthers backup outside linebacker Frankie Louvu also played for the Jets. So a couple of revenge games. Pat Elflein, the left guard.
Pat Elflein revenge. It's another Pat Elflein revenge game coming up here.
Exactly. So when you look at the game of New Orleans being displaced because of Hurricane Ida, not having some of those coaches available because of the COVID outbreak, then of course Michael Thomas, him not being available. Then coming game time, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Marshawn Lattimore, you weren't playing a healthy Saints team. Although the Panthers went out there and dominated them. So you kind of looked at it as, well, they got a really good defense. The quarterback's taking care of the football for the most part. And you would think that, hey, maybe this is a step in the right direction. There's no shame in losing to the Dallas Cowboys. That was actually a game I expected them to lose to Dallas. I just did not expect it to snowball like it did in the third quarter. And in the last Sunday against the Eagles was just one of the more inexplicable losses that you're ever going to see the Carolina Panthers lose, much like the game last year in Minnesota that they absolutely should have won against the Vikings. So it's a combination of just poor third quarters, the offense not showing up, the injury to Christian McCaffrey, and other defensive injuries, and just it's a young team. They're one of the youngest teams in the NFL, so I still think they're a good football team. Just the last 2 weeks have kind of exposed, like, hey, Sam Darnold might not necessarily actually be rehabilitated just yet, and Christian McCaffrey is pretty vital to this offense, and they got to figure out how to be competitive coming out of the break, opposed to just completely disappearing every third quarter. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, that's really weird. I'll take a look at that too for all my stuff. But tell me about Sam Darnold. Explain this Sam Darnold season to me. I had pretty much written him off. Maybe he got the post Adam Gase effect. And then maybe I was right, or am I? Or is he good, or isn't he? Or what is the deal with him?
I mean, my listeners know where I stand on this. When I took over the show back in March, I think my second show I ever did was me saying why it didn't make sense for Sam Darnold to come here to Carolina. And then a week later, they traded for him to come here to Carolina. Nice. So I've never been a fan of Sam Darnold coming here. I just felt like from the beginning, look, I get it. Teddy Bridgewater wasn't great last year. He's not the long-term answer. But I would rather just have his contract for one more year than give up a second, a fourth, and a sixth, which they've been able to recoup the fourth and the sixth round picks, but they still have given up a second round pick for Sam Darnold. Like, I'd rather do that than risk bringing in Sam Darnold. He also wasn't their first choice. They wanted Matthew Stafford. That didn't work out. He's in LA. They wanted Deshaun Watson and had the stuff not gone on with him with the legally. He's here, I believe, in Carolina. So the Darnold thing didn't make a ton of sense to me, because at the very least, maybe just draft a quarterback, even though I was never on board of bringing in a new quarterback. I've always been a guy who's like the offensive line, which is a major issue on this team right now. That's what I was yelling this for years, but all spring, all I was saying that draft. I was like, draft a left tackle, draft an offensive lineman. You don't need a quarterback if you can't protect them. And that's what we've seen the first couple of weeks, that you can't protect them. So the Panthers knew coming to the year that they had to have known that they don't have a strong offensive line. So if that's the case, why on earth would you give up assets to a guy who has shown time and time again, when he gets pressured, he wets himself? Like Sam Darnold, yes, he can be good in the right situation, but sitting here, the people have made excuses for him being like, oh, his offensive line stinks. It's like, at some point in time, you got to be able to overcome that. Like Lamar Jackson might not have a bad offensive line, but he has so many things going against him right now with the Baltimore Ravens. And what does he do? He goes out there and balls out every single week. Sam Darnold loses Christian McCaffrey for 2 weeks, and he has no idea what to do. He's staring down DJ Moore, who got taken away by Darius Slay on Sunday, 2 picks, and Robbie Anderson's been non-existent. At the very least, Teddy Bridgewater was able to spread the ball around last year, where Sam Darnold's keying in on 2 guys. Like, he can be good. And I've sat here and I've said, I'm going to give the guy a chance. I just am highly skeptical. You don't see guys who play the way he's played in the league come back and become successful starters. And quite honestly, the guys who play the way he played for 3 years don't typically ever get a chance to even be a starter again, let alone stay in the league for very long. And the fact that the Panthers handed him the keys after being that bad, I don't care if it was Gase or not. Like Tannehill, at least when he was with Adam Gase, wasn't that bad. Joe Flacco was better last year with the Jets in that offense than Sam Darnold. But all I heard about was the situation this, it's the Jets' fault that. So is it Gase's fault he threw 3 picks on Sunday? Like, I hate to be too critical on the guy, because I want it to work out, because it's better for the fan base, for the city, and for the organization for this not to be another one-and-done situation. I just question from the beginning, like, what are they seeing that makes them believe that Sam Darnold is going to come here and be an upgrade from Teddy Bridgewater? Like, especially when it comes to taking care of the football, which the last 6 quarters, it hasn't been his thing and hasn't done it well so far. But he's got an opportunity to come back, figure things out, play within himself. I just have a hard time believing that the man upstairs, David Tepper, the owner here in Carolina, is really liking what he's seen through 5 weeks so far. Like, he's a guy who's very aggressive, wants that franchise quarterback. I can't imagine that he's going to come after 17 weeks of the season and be like, yeah, Sam Darnold, that's the guy.
Yeah. It's like looking in a mirror. You have offensive line problems and a like pressure vulnerable quarterback. That's really controversial.
Yes. Not great.
Yeah. Well, let's flip to the other side of the ball, and maybe that's a little bit less sad. But I guess I have to ask the question because of what happened with Dallas and then giving up that lead against Philadelphia. Yeah. Are they frauds, or was this just a little bit of a fluke?
They're not frauds. I know Matt Rule, actually on Monday, the day after press conference, which ticked off a lot of people, he came out and said, that's back-to-back weeks where the defense, at the end of the game, need to get a stop, didn't get a stop for us. It's like, okay, buddy. Like, I brought this up actually after the game on Sunday, just being like, and I said this to my listeners, like, I'm not criticizing the defense. I'm just saying that is back-to-back weeks where they got to get off the field, but they couldn't do it. Dallas never thought for a second they were going to do it. Philly, I mean, it's not their fault. Like, the offense, even if they get the ball back against Philadelphia, Darnold probably throws a fourth pick, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway. The Cowboys thing, they have a physical offensive line. They played a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. And
yeah,
Panthers,
they like went jumbo.
Yeah, and the Panthers don't really have a lot of like big guys. The linebackers are pretty slight of frame, and even Shaq Thompson was injured that game. He played the rest of the snaps. He's not going to play again on Sunday with that foot injury he's got going on. So maybe that played a factor, but they just weren't good against the run in that game. And that was the first time they played a team that was seriously committed to running the football against them. Like, the Jets don't have a running game. Saints running game just did not work out. Houston doesn't have a running game. And on Sunday against Philly, they had everything bottled up. They only gave 88 yards in the first half, excuse me. And then later on, you let a team hang around after getting consecutive takeaways on back-to-back plays. The offense did nothing. So no, the defense is not frauds. They're the reason the Carolina Panthers are 3-2. They're the reason why, like, they have the opportunity to win these games. Because I've said from week one, if the offense disappears like they did against New York, eventually they're going to lose to a better team. I thought it'd be the Saints, but the defense was so good that day it didn't matter. Houston wasn't going to happen. Dallas, of course, went out there and took control in the third quarter. Then last week, an Eagles team that stinks hung around and eventually figured it out. So no, this defense is it's one of the only redeemable things about this Panthers team through 5 weeks after looking at the offensive line. Darnold, like, the skill positions are great and all that, but the defense has really been the calling card here in Carolina so far, and they deserve all of our praise and really none of our criticism, because it's not their fault that they lost on Sunday. And I wouldn't even blame them for losing the game against Dallas, even if they gave up 245 rushing yards, because they didn't give the ball to the other team twice in that third quarter. That was Sam Darnold.
Sure. Yeah. It's the defense is absolutely what is like striking fear into my heart going into this game. And how the Vikings offense matches up with them. I think there are some problems, but I guess we'll talk about the Vikings here in a little bit. For Vikings listeners, that'll be on Julian's show. So go check out Locked On Panthers after you're done with Locked On Vikings here, and we can kind of talk a little bit about how the Vikings match up with the Panthers. We're going to get into the ins and outs of the Panthers a lot more tomorrow, so make sure you stick around. We might even come on the whiteboard, so come watch on YouTube if you can. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL, shows on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Make sure you go check out the Peacock and Williamson podcast. Make that your second listen of the day. They're doing a great job over there covering the national angle each and every day, just like this here Locked On Vikings podcast. I'll see y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.